welcome to another episode of Talk That Get Results. I am Everett Weber Herbert, and as per usual, we are here every Tuesday evening with something that at least we think is of community interest and or of some concern. And if you think that you have something which fits into that category, you'd like to find out how you can be a part of the program, well, why don't you drop us a line? Address it to the Let's Talk program in care of Vaughan Radio, P.O. Box 195, Charlestown in Nevis. Or give us a call. Our numbers are 1-869-469-1616 and or 1700. And by the way, those will be the numbers you'll use to be a part of this evening's discussion. Again, thank you all very much for joining us. This is your voice in the community, Talk That Get Results. With regard to your participation in the show, we encourage you to call in on the numbers listed, 1-869-469-1616 and or 1700. Here's a suggestion. You got a question or comment, perhaps you can get a pencil, piece of paper, write it down so that you're well organized, and when you're getting on the show, you take as little time as possible so we can accommodate as many of you as we can. We ask only, first of all, you respect yourselves and then respect others, because we will not accept anything we deem not within our broadcast standards. But we encourage you to always be forceful with your point. Again, thank you all for joining us. Your voice in the community, Talk That Get Results. And also, you can check us out on a YouTube channel. Go to YouTube, click subscribe, type Vaughan Radio, and you got us. Or you can follow us on our Facebook page at Vaughan Radio or via www.vaughanradio.com. And you get the video streaming live. Tonight, Dr. Patricia Bartlett, good evening.
Good evening, Weber. Good evening to my fellow panelists. Good evening to the entire listening and viewing audiences. Weber, I know that this is an abbreviated format of the Let's Talk program, so I won't take up too much time with salutation, but just if you would allow me just to say a good morning, good evening to my husband in London.
Edric W. Stanley, good evening.
Good evening, Weber. Good evening to my fellow panelists. Good evening to the people of St. Kitts Nevis, and more particularly the people who listen to us regularly on the Let's Talk program. Of course, like I've appealed, and Weber might give us a little more time this evening, or of course it's at his discretion. Our listeners, they yearn for a little more time. Weber, good evening.
Okay, I just wanted to mention and say a very pleasant good evening to Ted Hobson. And I know that number of listeners to this program and this radio station far and wide, because since we've been in hibernation since the pandemic, and persons are generally concerned as to how is so and who's doing what and so on and so forth. Well, Ted is fine. Spoke with him recently, and he is listening and stuff like that, but we know how to practice patience. You know what I'm saying? It will soon be over, we think, and then we'll be back stronger than ever. So Ted sends his regards to everybody. He still listens, and maybe if we have time tonight, I will share some of his thoughts, because we discussed a number of particular areas of concern, and I felt as if we were on the program, and it's too bad that you couldn't hear his expression on certain topics. Anyway, good night, Ted. And then the others, Naya and Mr. Brand, the Honorable Spencer Brand, we're doing a rotation basis, because we try to, since we don't know, we try to be guided by those who are better informed than us. Secondly, I'd like to, I don't know whether or not either of you have anything that you like to put on the table very early, but I'd just like to mention the fact that in case, especially those in diaspora and so on, and not aware, that we are moving towards a gradual opening and maybe a total opening of our borders here in St. Kitts and Nevis, and I think they're targeting October. So that's going to be very interesting. And also we had the Superintendent of Police, Lyndon David, in charge of the Charlestown or the Nevis Division last week, and some interesting information on crime and traffic situation, and also this new regulation where you can perhaps later on get a ticket if you're not masked up. So that is also interesting. And also late news today that world-renowned sprinter, record holder Usain Bolt, had tested positive, and it was linked to a birthday party that he had. And now we're learning that the authorities are going to be doing some investigations concerning that particular party. So this thing is serious, and it doesn't work like other things where we can say one thing and tell people do that, and we do differently and get away with it. This is no respecter of persons. So whether you're the government and you have a friend in high places and they allow you to go against the protocol, against the rules, it does not mean that you'll get away with it. So it's an interesting situation. Okay, so I don't know whether or not Edric or Dr. Bartlett would like to come.
Well, Webo, I must say that we are blessed here, and based on what has happened over the past months with the coronavirus, all leaders have really buckled down to task and really kept the country and its peoples safe. And I must make the clarion call that our borders, which must be open, must be tied to certain other protocols. But those that are in place already, which have been repeated over and over, we should have it nailed down as a citizenry, like a recitation. And we must do it consistently, continually, and ultimately. I think we all would come out on the other end properly. But I must add that a mandate probably can be made that we go back into our Garden of Eden, St. Kitts and Nevis, through our health department, for them to garner and bring together herbalists who truly know what we have within our Garden of Eden to help us protect our bodies and prolong life and to keep away whatever this kind of corona or COVID-19 is. I'm convinced fully that we have the stuff grown locally, naturally. And if we take our doses and share, as the case might be, I guarantee you. Did I say guarantee you? Yes. It takes a little hard work to bring this about. But if we do it, we'll keep our country and people safe. Luckily, we are on the Forbes list, and based on where we are, it's a good number. And I hope that our tourism department would have gotten the information as a news clip and play it over and over and over in other jurisdictions to lure people here and to ensure that we are able to get monies from these people to help propel our country and people economically forward and upward. Where I leave it there at this juncture.
Yeah, well, I would like to make a few observations. In the first instance, I know that you had the police on last week and they had discussed the matter of people wearing masks. But I'm just wondering how far that is going to go, because I see a lot of people who are wearing these gadgets around their faces, not necessarily over them covering their nose and their mouths, like I'm sure, people would even realize, they go into the supermarket, most people have their noses uncovered, and it's not really supposed to be a muzzle. A muzzle goes over just your mouth. It should be a mask which covers your nose as well as your mouth. And if people are not going to wear them properly, I don't know, I think we might have a false sense of security, thinking that maybe we are protecting ourselves when we are still exposing ourselves. So if we're not going to wear masks properly, we might as well not be wearing masks. I don't know how police are going to go about enforcing that, Because if you have a mask on your face but it's not properly on, do you get a ticket for that? I don't know who is going to make that call. It behooves us as a people to stay vigilant. I hear Stanley talking about exploring possibilities of using natural remedies or herbal medication and stuff like that. That might be good for an ordinary time, but this is no ordinary time. As it relates to COVID-19, we just don't know enough about it, and every day seems like we're learning more about it, and it is highly infectious, and so I don't think that this is anything for us to fool around with. I don't know that we necessarily have the time to explore all these things that may or may not work, but I'm just hoping that we would stick to the task at hand, and that is to prevent the introduction of COVID-19 here. Someone I think mentioned about the opening of the borders, or the imminent opening of the borders, and I'm still waiting to see what the protocol is going to be to keep us all here safe. It's all well and good to open, but as we would have recognized, throughout the Caribbean, those who have started or tried to, most of them basically back in lockdown again. If you don't do these things, properly, you're probably bound to end up that same place again. And there are more challenges, related to introducing this thing and not realizing that you have it until late. And we are seeing an explosion of cases in places that, because it just has to get seeded. You don't even recognize sometimes that, somebody might be in company, like you just referenced the case of Usain Bolt. I mean, people at a party, everybody looked normal, and then after that, he's positive. Now you have to go and do contact tracing to find out all who went to the party and who those people would have had contact with themselves. So this is not something for us to play around with. I recognize that it's going to be rough. It's already rough on us. We are seeing businesses close. We are seeing people being made redundant. It's happening all over the world. I don't know that is necessarily any comfort to those of us who have to go through these tough economic times, but this is something that we're going to have to see our way through. And I think maybe we need to start doing some reflection on the way we are proceeding as it relates to the development of our people. And I am always being a proponent for developing the family, because all the members of the family, the weak or the strong would help the weak, and I know Weber, you're always saying that, but we can only do it if we're a family, if we have the spirit of a family, and I'm hoping that we will get back to that time. Stanley talk about lowering people here, but as we are well aware, the US would have put out an advisory advising their residents or their citizens not to travel to places like St. Kitts Nevis, among other Caribbean places, because of the high risk associated, or the high risk category in which they place us as it relates to COVID-19. So we have to understand why is it that they deem us to be high risk, and I don't think that is being properly communicated to our people. It's not necessarily in my place, although I think I have a fair understanding of it, but I think it's about time that the authorities, maybe our epidemiologists, so I understand we have one, should come out and probably explain to people, because I hear people getting all upset that why could they, how could they put us on a high risk, in a high risk category? But indeed, if you were to look at it scientifically, we are indeed high risk. But I think, like I said, it's not in my place to tell people about the risk category in which we are, to explain it. But I think it should be explained to us so we can have a fairer understanding as to our standing in the world.
Dr. Bartlett, I wanted to weigh in on the first part of your presentation, when you were referencing the wearing of the mask, or the proper wearing of the mask, and ask a question whether you think that the improper wearing of the mask has any relation to the fact that there is a view, and maybe a factual view, on Nevis and St. Kitts that we have no COVID cases. We're COVID free. And as a consequence of that, persons may be saying, well, okay, they say that I must put it on, so I have it on. But in the back of their minds, they might be thinking, I'm safe.
Yes. I think that is a fair assessment as to what is going on here. And coupled with that, I think people are kind of tired of it, because if you have an intervention in place for too long and it doesn't seem to be effective, or people can't measure it, they kind of, scoff at it. But I think you're right. People are taking the attitude that, well, we don't have COVID in St. Kitts Nevis. I've heard it. I go to the supermarket and I'm always chastising people, particularly, well, it doesn't matter whether I know you or not. If I see you and you're not wearing it properly, that is the kind of person I am. I'm going to tell you, I think you should pull up your mask over your nose. Even though I have mine, I still care about my fellow man. But there is this perception that there's no COVID in St. Kitts Nevis. You may be right, you may not be right, but are you going to risk your life for that? The thing is, we have to recognize what the risk factors are. We have people saying, well, the borders are closed. The borders are closed. Officially, the borders are closed. But if, human nature, there are things that don't always go to the official channel, and from time to time you'll hear about people, being landed that are not going to the proper route. There's a risk associated with that, because if someone comes into the country unofficially, and they're not going through the protocol that they should go through in terms of mitigating against COVID-19, we could very well be seeding it right here in our population and not know. And the thing is, by the time you find out, because you have such a high percentage of people who would have or who could be carrying the virus and not necessarily showing any signs of it, by the time it gets seeded here and we have an explosion of people start to get sick, it might just be a little too late for us, So people have to be mindful of that. And that's why I said I think it's incumbent on the officials who are tasked with the responsibility of doing the work of keeping us, safe, and communicating the risk to us. I think they should come out and explain to people why is it necessary. We don't know, because if you're not testing your population and random testing, and I'm always talking about that, you don't know what is out there. And that, people sometimes will just die. You don't know what they die from, or you may have people who just not showing any signs of it. And like I said, it's when you get to the people who are most vulnerable and they start succumbing to it, then is when, we just might be overwhelming the system that we have in place.
In relation to the point that you made about persons coming in, whether the borders are closed or not, I don't know how many people are aware that is the issue they have in the British Virgin Islands currently. They had an explosion in cases. They had to go back into lockdown, and they have traced it to the fact that persons were smuggling in from the neighboring islands and going to the bars and so on. In fact, I think in one of the outer islands in the British Virgin Islands, that is where they got that from. People come in on the boats and they go there to the bars, and this one gentleman, they have concluded, brought it, and then the spread. So as you mentioned, there are a lot of ways people can come in and so on and so forth. So it's rather interesting. I just wanted to mention that at this point. Perchance a lot of persons were not aware of that.
Yeah, I picked up on that in the news today as well, and I was like, that's quite interesting, because a lot of times, sometimes you don't even know people are being smuggled in, I had a conversation with a friend of mine late last year, and he just couldn't understand the justification for the mask. And I said, well, really, scientifically, no one can prove that, and we all have to wear masks. But I had to point out to him that people are still, indulging in, these illegal activities because of COVID. COVID did not shut down the smuggling ring, and people continue to indulge in human, smuggling. And that is one of the high risk factors, I think, that because we are so close in terms of islands, in terms of proximity to other islands, we have to be careful of that. I mean, a guy could get in a boat and skip a couple hours, he's in St. Martin, or back, and you have COVID right there, and it's just a high risk situation for us, and I think we need to understand what our risks are. And
I guess we can't totally lock down everything. One of the things also that I find is intriguing is the fact that they did some studies, and they found that the more democratic a country was, the more difficult it was to get its people to adhere to the regulations or the protocols that have been put in place. So those that are not as democratic, the people seem to have been more coherent and adhere to what the protocols were and so on. So I found that also was interesting.
Yes, when you're democratic, and I think those islands or countries that adhere to democracy, a certain level of education had been conducted, and consequently, or as a result of that education, people are more sensitized, more sensible, and ultimately would be able to have their own rationale as to why they're not going to agree or follow certain rules, guidelines, as the case might be.
So
but
you call that being more sensible?
Certain countries.
So when a person put you to do or point you to a particular remedy for a situation, and you ignore that, correct me if I'm wrong, because every now and then I make a fuzzy conclusion, right? So,
Quite so.
The more I think we're halfway through is good for a light moment. So anyway, so the more democratic you are, the more brilliant you are, and the more you are able to ignore the
Rationalize, more able to rationalize. Go ahead.
Why does everybody do me that?
Go ahead.
The more they're able to ignore the cure.
Quite so. You find in
really?
dictatorial countries, people are quite ignorant. You go back to certain countries.
I'm going to let Dr. Bradley challenge you or telling you that, so I'm not going
Well, I'm saying to you, you can name some of the countries, Haiti, and you go back to some of the Eastern European countries, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia. Not to say that you don't have educated people there, but because of the dictatorial policies that have been so prevalent, there is a mandate given to the dictator, and it is followed because the consequences are vast and swift. But within the democratic societies, you would find that you have all kinds of people who are going to challenge it, and lawyers are ready to take on a case that ultimately...
So in essence, but I promised to let Dr. Bartlett. So Dr. Bartlett, go ahead and reason with...
I think you might be a little more diplomatic about it, Mr. Weber, so I think... he floored me with that one, Weber, to be quite honest with you, because I see no correlation. I see no correlation between democracy and necessarily between democracy and intelligence or education, for that matter.
Really?
Because no, I don't. If you go to China, you have some of the most brilliant people there who are scientists, and that is not necessarily, a place that you would consider to be, a democratic place. But you have some states that are obviously police states, and if there's a mandate to be followed, it's going to be enforced. We would have something on the books, but we just can't get it enforced. I mean, what is the point in having it on the books if you can't enforce it? You might as well not have it on the books. So I find no fault with any civilization that finds that within because for the good of the entire populace that you have to enforce certain laws. So I think in this case, something like mass, I think you mandate it that people wear it, and then you get people who could enforce that. And I don't care whether you're in Yugoslavia or Haiti or any other place that Stanley might want to point out. I think if it's for the general good of the country, I think that, it might be a good thing that you have a police state, as it relates to that.
Let me ask this question. The maximum number of cases we had at any given time was about maybe a dozen, maybe? 14, 15,
15,
something like, okay.
Not at one time, though, over a period of
Right,
time.
over a period, okay. So let's...
It rises and it falls.
Okay, so let's use 15 for the purposes of the point that I'm trying to make. Now, we're set to reopen schools. We are set to reopen the borders, get the hotels and everything reopen. At what point, Mr. Stanley, do you think that should we, God forbid, should we begin to pick up a couple of cases, having reopened schools and getting back to normal and so on and so forth, and somebody might have been Dr. Bartlett or yourself who had mentioned that most of the other islands who in the Caribbean, let's stick with that began to open up and so on, they found themselves getting a couple of cases, and in some instances they had to go and close the borders down again. And when we were at 15, so let's use 15 as a high, we were on lockdown. And what number, at what point, you think if we reopen as we're heading to, we might see us do that again?
At what point in terms of numbers?
Yes.
Well, I personally feel that certain protocols must be adhered to and certain practices must operate in tandem. We must find the resources to do
that's a given. Based work with me. That's a given.
Zero.
Work with me. That's a given based on the point or the argument I'm proffering, right? Given all that and everything, even the bush that you recommend that we should use, even that thrown into the mix, and you still have an increasing number of cases, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm asking you, at what point you think we may recede?
I don't think we should even attempt to open schools when we have 5, 6, or 7. Meaning, we attempt to do virtual learning, carrying it now, bring it up to speed, whatever it takes, the resources, human, economic,
work with me,
and
Mr. Stanley. Work with me, Mr. Stanley. We don't have any current cases at the moment. That's also a given in the mix, in the argument that I'm making. So we're saying, come September, we're opening the schools. October, we're opening the borders. Perchance we do that. When we do that, what if we have 1, 2, 3? Now, before, let's say in April, May, and so on, we got to, let's say, 15, as I'm making the point, and then we're on lockdown. I'm asking you, at what point, perchance it happens again, 1, 2, 3, at what point would you say maybe we need to lock down again?
We don't have any now, and therefore, once it begins to raise its head,
well, yeah.
So keep it at 0.
Okay,
and I would say, okay, let me be generous and say 2 cases.
Okay, so you're saying that should we open the borders, we open the schools and so on and so forth. Let's say we do that in October, and then by late October
we got 2 cases.
Got 2 cases. You're saying what? Close again?
And then move things in tandem. So as to...
What's your definition or what's of in tandem?
Meaning virtual learning, contact tracing, to ensure that the number remains at 2 and no further.
So you lock the schools down, and what about the borders?
The borders obviously got to be locked down too.
Okay. So you will do that. Okay. 869-469-1616-1700. We get a break and then we will be back. This is Thought That Get Results with Dr. Patricia Bartlett and Edric W. Stanley. Your phone calls on 1-869-469-1616 and or 1700. We're back after these.
You're listening to Vaughn Radio from the Federation of St. Kitts Nevis.
Builders Paradise is doing it again by offering a blowout sale on granite, cheaper than tiles and Formica on your counter. The man has gone crazy again. A full slab of granite is on sale for as little as $599.99. Yes! Builders Paradise also offers a special delivery for your granite. So make use of this golden opportunity while stocks last. Visit Builders Paradise today at the C.A. Paul Southwell Industrial Site, St. Kitts, or call them at 466-4938 so they can help you complete your home. Builders Paradise, where your island dreams come true.
Back on this episode of Thought That Get Results with Dr. Patricia Bartlett and Edric W. Stanley. Dr. Bartlett, do you have any thoughts on that hypothetical?
Interesting, Webo. The thing is, we have to look at where our source market is going to be. If it is that we are going to be importing or inviting people here from places like the US that currently has a high and well, I guess I can say that they have a relatively high prevalence of the disease, in the US. Chances are we have a high probability of importing cases into the Federation within probably the first plane load of people that comes here, if they're coming from the US. If we are going to target markets for tourism outside of the US, we may stand maybe a better chance of not importing, or have a high probability of importing cases in the first trip that comes here. So it means that we probably would have to be looking to places that, have, a low prevalence, like, maybe in the Asian, market. But I don't see that, being a reality right now. And I'm thinking that we probably will be showing back the doors to, invite back, the Americans. The Canadians will be a better bet to bring in. But if you're going to have that high level of risk, because it's going to be a risky business if you're going to open the borders anytime soon. We have to be very vigilant about have a protocol in place that would be able to find cases if we do import cases in a very early stage. And because of the exponential nature of this disease, it's going to be very testing for us. And I would imagine that a threshold would be arrived at with the epidemiologist who is on the panel that they have. I would imagine that the planning board, the NIOSH and the whatever well, let me just stick with the NIOSH. So I would imagine that an epidemiologist is there to advise them of the potential risk or the relative risk, and to establish a threshold, because if it is, and it depends on the circumstances, if it is that you're catching all the cases or potential cases that come in the border and you'll be able to isolate them before there's contact with the general public, then maybe it might be able to run for a couple of weeks before we run into problems. However, I don't see that happening. I'm not generally a pessimistic person, but in this particular scenario, I don't see it happening. I see us closing down relatively shortly after we would have opened. That has been the experience of most people. I don't see what puts us in such a unique position that we would not be doing the same thing or experiencing it the same way. But I would imagine that after, it depends, like I said, it depends on the circumstances. If it is that we were to find somebody in the community who had not traveled or who had not any direct contact with anyone who would have recently traveled, and that would be cause for concern. And I would imagine that in a case like that, that if you were to find one person in the community, under those circumstances, that the place will be shut down.
Let me just put another scenario in the mix and put it another way. What if in our planning we were to put a risk factor, a risk element in it, and say, well, okay, Edric's view is, if I get 2 cases, I'm closing back down. What if when we're planning, we say, well, we know there is a risk factor in it, or we do the cost-reward theory, and we say that we're going to put in the mix that we're going to go ahead. If we get 5 cases, we keep going. 6 cases, keep going. 20 cases, keep going. And then we say, we put a ceiling and say, well, X number of cases, that's when we close.
Well, obviously, I'm certain the planners have something of that sort. But I'll tell you, from day one, I said, who in, stay in, and who out, stays out.
But you seem to say,
and I really meant it. I also said that we must put a policy in place, a mandated policy through law, that the airline and the cruise industry must be contacted and let them know before a person signs up to travel to St. Kitts and Nevis. They have to show certification of negativity of COVID-19 before they show up at the airport or the seaport. And when they get onto that airline or cruise ship and they arrive here, we test them again.
Right, but I think that is part of the plan anyway.
Well, no, before I heard anybody say it, I sent word out at the highest level for them to, in fact.
And obviously,
what I'm saying to you is that we cannot put in the hard work, or we must put in the hard work to ensure that our people and country is safe.
Yeah, but the point is,
And
how can you guarantee safety? You can do your best, correct?
The trophy is never gained without a tremendous amount of effort, Webber. And what I'm saying to you, barring the idea that Pat brought in, maybe you brought it in, about the British Virgin Islands, where people smuggled in, barring that, using what I just said, we know that we have sectionalized or barricaded our people.
You know, there's one thing that is consistent about you that I love very much. You're consistently consistent in your philosophy and ideology, because I'm listening to you there and I'm hearing the same philosophy of when you almost persuaded everybody that you can build an Edric constitution that is cannot be, what's the word?
Well, you have to be a thinker, and you have to understand what must be done.
But that's what I'm saying. That's
to cover the bases.
That's my point.
We can't sit on our laurels and expect to gain the rewards.
That's my observation of you. That's all I'm saying. Your theme is common, and that is very commendable. This is a light moment. Sometimes you just like how our people behave, right? You give them a great compliment, or you tell somebody, "Oh, that's a lovely dress," and they say, "Oh, I'm gonna take it off." You know, so I'm giving you a great compliment, Edric.
Well, maybe I'm just galvanizing it.
So you just realize?
No.
What do you?
No, I don't just say things off the top of my head, you know. My thing is that I love my country, I love my people, I love our people, and I want us to stay safe, and I want us to do well, and we can do well, and God has endowed us so far that we are still here, and we have not had any problems. Now, those people who became lazy in the United States, a bunch of lazy people, why this thing is dogging them, and therefore they got the resources,
okay,
they got the personnel. They got everything at their disposal,
But they're
they are lazy.
Okay,
They have
now,
not put in hard work.
okay, let me go on and ask this question. Are there any lessons learned so far from the last, 8 months, Dr. Bartlett, in terms of, the pandemic and the way we had to do our adjustments and so on?
Well, I'm hoping that we would have learned some lessons. Some people would have learned lessons on an individual basis, and I'm hoping that as a country, collectively, we would have learned, a broader lesson. And one that sticks out, to me in particular, is that of, saving, the responsibility on all of us to save a little something for the rainy day. It has been rough going for a lot of people, and I've seen, people who, people are borrowing from other people because they just did not save. And I'm sure that no matter what little you make, you should be able to save something for a rainy day. And we have experienced that at an individual level, and we're seeing that also on a macro scale, in that the country itself seems to be broke, because we have not, been very prudent fiscally, and so we have no monies, and that's why we're going to be forced to open prematurely, and I say prematurely without any reservation, because I don't think that we're necessarily ready yet, for that. So I'm hoping that going forward, that people will recognize the importance of saving something for a rainy day. And maybe it is something that young people have to learn. And I see that there's also a push, in the political arena for us to just embrace everybody who is young. You need young people, and I'm hearing, people shaming older people out of politics. And I'm wishing at this point that we had some more level-headed older people in politics, because I think that we might have been in a better place at this point in time. Because young people seem not to understand that sometimes you would have, these situations that creep upon you, and if you don't have insurance, which is we don't have, then it's going to be rough sailing. And I'm hoping that we would have learned our lessons individually as it relates to saving something for a rainy day, and as well as at the macro level. Additionally, there's one other point that I wanted to make as it relates to the experience, and I hope we had a lot of time to reflect on it, because we had a lot of time home not doing anything productive. This idea of disbanding the family, because I find that the drive, and most of the policies are geared towards, the empowerment of the individual. And I'm hoping that we would have learned from this experience that family is important. And again, it goes down to the individual level as well as at the macro level. We have to develop our families. We must have people around us who care about us. And so who would not let us fall by the wayside. So somebody who you can, if you don't have, they can share, and we pool our resources. We see other people come here from elsewhere and pool their resources, and in some instances seem to be doing even better than our people who are here and who would have had a leg up, to start with. So those are the two main things that I think that I would, like to share about what I think the experience would have taught me to reflect on. I'm hoping that that would be something that other people might have had some time to reflect on and consider seriously.
Edric, on that same point, but specifically in the area of finance, because you're a guru when it comes to that, and against the backdrop of late the Scotiabank departure, the RBTT bank issues, and now the First Caribbean International Bank. What has that done in terms of society, the confidence in the financial system and whatever other areas?
Well, I would say that confidence in the financial system is still there, because the central bank is charged with the responsibility to ensure that we have a strong banking system. And we do have a strong banking system. There might be one or two that may not be as strong as they should be, but systems are put in place, or lessons are put in place, or tutoring being put in place to ensure that they reached to the level of strength. The space has probably too many institutions as a result. The central bank, again, is playing a major role with reference to weeding out. Maybe that's not the right word, but we find that Scotia has departed. We find that RBTT through the Royal Bank of Canada is departing in Nevis, and maybe the Royal Bank of Canada in St. Kitts would be departing too, and also First Caribbean would be departing. But therefore it leaves a smaller space within which the local banks can thrive. So that's one. In the area of self-sustenance, agriculture is one of the major areas where our people have to begin to look to find ways to sustain themselves through this COVID-19 pandemic. And I see quite a number of people now beginning to do land cultivation, and we know how that has sustained us for many years in the earlier years. I say if this, and I believe this coronavirus or COVID-19 would persist for a long, long period of time, I think it's going down to the end of time. And therefore, it's going to thrust us back to 25 years. And as Pat mentioned about, we have to begin to share what we have. Not only the resources, but also knowledge, guidance as to how our people have to be able to weather the storm. And we can, because luckily we're in a place, St. Kitts and Nevis, that we have good soil, relatively good rainfall. Some are productive people, some are quite lazy. Of course, I got it on my list here to talk about that. But if we truly understand, we can begin to learn.
To talk about lazy people?
As to how we as a race, what we must do. So therefore, we have to begin to unlearn certain habits and learn new habits, and it ultimately would lead to self-preservation. In that regard, we have to learn how to cultivate, plant, nurture, grow, reap, share. We may not have money in the bank, because only a few had money in the bank in the earlier years. But the land provided, and we still got the land. Most of it has gone into tropical vegetation. And I'm trying to show quite a number of them where we should begin again. Today, I picked it from my tree and I sold. Mango from my tree and I sold. Friday evening, a fellow asked me, Stanley, how are you doing? I said, I'm hustling. He said, hustling? At your age? I said, my friend, if you don't get that word in your vocabulary, you will be doomed and you'll be thrown in the trash heap of history. And I sat there for 2 hours and gave them a lecture until I was able to convince them the word hustle should be in their vocabulary. One from Silicon Valley mentioned it in an interview, and he is a multi-billionaire. And he said why he uses that word is because he gives to people ideas. But in order to continue to propel himself forward, he has to continue to hustle. So I'm saying to you, we have to get up off our laurels and begin to produce for self-sustenance and self-preservation. And this COVID-19 has taught many of us a lesson. Do not waste what we have. Conserve. I try to teach those around me. When you leave a room, kilowatt. Don't waste water. Don't waste water. Don't waste anything. Time will come when we might need what we have wasted. Weber.
Weber, if I may make a slight contribution to what Stanley would have said as it related to the banks, and we are seeing these banks leave. Mind you, these banks, I'm talking about not the traditional Nevis Bank and the other indigenous banks that we would have had around, I think, and National Bank. I think maybe those are the only two indigenous banks.
Dr. Bartlett, let me just accommodate this person. See if there's okay, please call back, and I'd like to also make a point on that same topic. Go ahead.
Yes, so we have seen these banks come in, they have reaped what they could have, but if we look around, we see what is happening. Our people are just over leveraged. We have more, I mean, we have taken on a lot of risk around here, personal risk, family risk, I don't know a lot of people who have taken on these risks to build businesses, but a lot of these loans that we have taken out, these are personal loans, and if you have personal loans and you have no job, then there is nothing there to extract anymore. And I think that is what has been happening in terms of the exodus that we're seeing as it relates to these these banks, exogenous banks, while the indigenous ones stayed, they have no place to go. But their low returns, there's not much left here to reap from what we have, because we're all over leveraged. Everybody, you have a house, you already have that mortgage for the next 30 years, you can't get nothing out of it. You have a car. I mean, we're just living above our means. And I've heard the Premier, appealing to our people time and time again, to live within their means. I mean, you can't watch the Premier. He has two salaries. You only have one, or you have half of one. Live accordingly. You do keep off his Facebook page, so when he posts his lobster, you don't see it, and want to do the same thing. Live within your means, and people have to get that understanding. There's really no room for much growth on island as it is now, as it relates to any bank. And so it's not, I wasn't surprised necessarily when I heard that, another bank was going to be leaving, because our people have just been over leveraged, and we just don't have the discipline really to set aside something and manage our fiscal affairs very well, because maybe we don't see enough good examples of it.
So here's a question in relation to that, Mr. Stanley, that someone asked me. And you're my go-to guy when it comes to financial matters. What happens to the loans that individuals would have had with these banks now that they're leaving? For example, if this bank which is leaving now, First Caribbean, and I have a loan from them, will they leave with my loan? What happens?
Listen, the loans that are given by these banks have been collateralized, meaning the bank is holding something for these loans, assets. So these assets, depending whether it's land, house and land, a car, furniture, as the case might be. Well, furniture is minuscule, but a car, land, house. The bank is not going to over leverage itself. They ask you for maybe 66% in terms of the balance of payment, and they're holding 33% of assets. But at the same time, they have done a valuation on that asset, and they're not going to lose. And therefore, they will eventually sell that asset. The court, of course, is going to come to ensure that you, the borrower, would be somewhat protected. When I say protected, not being taken for a real ride. But the bank is not going to lose, and therefore, the loan that would have gone sour, the assets that the bank is holding, would be liquidated to satisfy the balance that's on the books.
Oh, really?
That's how it works, Weber.
Well, you know, maybe it is a very important question because, you know, in this particular example, I don't know whether or not the customers have been well apprised as to what their situation will be going forward.
The customer obviously would like to get from all of that way.
But I know a lot of them are demand loans. But
they can entitle them anything.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, I'm trying to. A lot of them are demand loans, but the reality is that most of these people cannot come up with what is left on the books with those loans at a short minute notice. Notwithstanding, you made the agreement maybe in the fine print or whatever.
Well, the banks are owned by stockholders, and the stockholders obviously would demand of that institution to ensure that when they're going to issue a loan, the loan will be somewhat guaranteed. You got a cosigner, either a cosigner or collateral that's there that the bank is holding. So if you don't have the collateral, but you have a cosigner, the cosigner obviously has to put forward his collateral to ensure that you get the loan.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then.
So don't think that the bank would be holding you. And there are a lot of people who think that the bank must hold on that non-performing loan if they decide to fold their tent. No, doesn't work that way.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, so you would therefore advise that in this current situation or scenario, you would advise persons who have loans with the said bank to try and go in and perhaps speak with them to find out, well, what is the situation going forward? Will I still have to be paying my monthly payments for the next 2 months, 3 months, or 10 years as it's scheduled? How it's going to work? Would you advise persons to do that?
Well, they must, and the bank will have advised them as to what the next step would be. If they're leaving the space, they, in fact, are still indebted to the bank or the institution, and in that regard, these are the steps that must be taken to bring some amicable settlement to the agreement of the two parties.
Can you elaborate a little on the term that I just mentioned, demand loans? Because I think a lot of people who have loans are not abreast of that particular condition.
Well, there should be, but a demand loan is just
the reality is, you well know that most people don't know.
Well, I would understand, but at the same time, I am almost certain that 99% of them know, and the bank would have informed them as to what the next step would be.
Yes, Dr. Martin.
Yeah, well, I really don't know what the procedure is, and I would imagine that we would hear something from the bank, you know, because there is a process. You can't just wind down and just leave. You must have, you know, some kind of facility in place. So I would imagine that there would be some structure that is put up, whether it is a trust administrative type, you know, structure that, you know, people will be able to pay, you know, through this trust, you know, administrator, you know, or whatever the system is that is put in place. I would imagine that the central bank might be in a better position to inform, you know, the customers or those who really would be affected by it, what the procedure would be. But it's not something that is just going to happen just haphazardly. I think there's a structure in place, and we just have to wait to hear exactly how it would be, you know, administered. So I think people should just, whoever have, you know, take note, you know, loans at those, at least that particular institution, that, you know, the closure is quite imminent. I understand. I think maybe a call to the bank, you know, would just at least help to guide them in the right direction as to how they're going to maneuver during this period.
The bank would usually say, I have to call in this loan, I have to call this loan, meaning I have to call the borrower back to the table to tell them what we have to do to bring about an amicable solution to the money that has been borrowed, the assessed value of the assets and come to some amicable solution. And this is not dependent only on the bank and the borrower, but you have the court system involved. The court is there to be the arbitrator to ensure that the consumer or the borrower is not taken for a ride, and the bank and its shareholders.
But in this particular case, and I guess we can just ask questions and discuss and speculate, because we have not been getting a lot of information about it. But they have a branch in St. Kitts anyway. So in some semblance, it's a federation, you can basically say it's one. So that probably might not have a lot of upsetting issues.
It's very likely that National might step in, because National is one of the strongest local.
Step in where? Because
Step into and buy them out.
but you mean both in St. Kitts and Nevis?
And Nevis, yes,
Oh,
and
okay.
National can. National can afford to. National is a very
Yeah.
strong bank.
Okay, I think that we've got to
And it
take
would be
the
good
last
for
word from you.
shareholders.
We will now be going to Leadership Matters, a program of the government of St. Kitts and Nevis. This program repeats tomorrow at 10 o'clock following the VON News Minute. Join the Honorable Mark Brantley tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock for On the Mark. Thank you all again for joining us. This is your voice in the community. Thought that get results. You all have a wonderful evening.
From Queen City, Nevis, this is the powerhouse of the Eastern Caribbean.